huge thing, and I'm like, what the fuck do you care how big or how, like, and then he's like, I bought me a bunny rabbit, and I'm like, okay. So he sent me pictures of it, and then he's like, yeah, I have all this money, and like, I don't know what to do with it now, because you told me I should go get a job. I was like, I never told you shit. You were complaining about needing more money, so I just pushed along that. But I never
So that's
told
his superiority? Is
And-
that he has a lot of money?
I'm guessing, and that
And what's the
that
inferiority?
he has a small, that he's like, it must be bigger than mine. I'm like,
Okay, so for a man,
and he said, fuck you to me.
and we're going to talk a little bit about the chakras today.
Yeah.
Second chakra. Are you familiar with the chakras? Are you familiar with the chakras? Yes? Okay, so everybody, because we talk about that. Second chakra, that's me. So second chakra, male especially, but all humans, penis, wallet, self-worth.
Right.
What did I say on Tuesday? What did I say to you? The 2 C words. Coin and calorie. When you hear people, men more coin and women more calorie. When you hear people talk about coin and calorie, so money and weight or food or things like that, it's a self-worth issue. So that's an absolute self-worth issue. So whether he uses an inferiority comment or a superiority comment, it's still a self-worth issue.
Yeah, he's like, you and your psychology classes, da da da. I'm like, listen, I'm just trying to hear you out. Like, what the f do you want from me?
Okay, but remember, we're not changing anyone.
No.
And unless somebody has an incongruence, do we remember what incongruence is?
Yeah.
An incongruence, I like thin crust, there's no place for change. That person isn't looking for change. It's only when they're saying something, they mean something else, or they're thinking something and they're saying something else, things like that, that we can actually move in there and change, or help try to change, plant a seed. So, your parents are the mom and dad that left the story in the Disney sort of pantheon, okay? And your client must have, and we'll talk about Stacy in a second because you saw her response was different. Your parents must have some sort of issue. They must. That's the equivalent of Cinderella's mom being dead and her dad being off to work. The parent must have a flaw of some sort. It's the only way that, like Drew had said, the child is going to grow and live their own life, and it is the only way that a human being is going to have a human side. That human side is what they come to work on. That's why they're there to see you. That is what they're having a problem with. That is what they're judging. That is what they don't like about themselves. Where did they get the judgment?
Their parents.
From their parents doing what?
The same exact
I would say just
thing,
getting more.
pretty much.
The same or
The opposite.
or the opposite. So you know that that person's parents did the same behavior or the opposite behavior. And that is why they beat themselves up. And there's another reason why you and your client beat themselves up about having a human tendency. Is because it goes in contrast to the value system of the family. So if you have a problem with promiscuity, it is because the value system in the family was keep it in your pants, don't give it away the milk for free.
Yeah.
There were those sort of things that were being said in the family. And that person is judging themselves against what their parents did or said. So I'm just picking on James because we ended with him the other day, and you were saying about consistency. What was the value system about consistency or inconsistency in your family? what did you hear growing up, or what did you see, or what did your family express? Yes, I'm recording.
We're doing the duty observation downstairs. You're welcome.
Thank you. What did you learn about that in your family, about the importance of consistency or inconsistency?
It's probably one of the most important qualities that you can have as a person is to be consistent.
Okay, and who wasn't consistent in the family that they criticized?
That's probably my mom and my dad at an early age.
So mom criticized dad that he wasn't consistent, and he beats himself up because he has his father's bad bucket item of inconsistency. It is exactly what he's supposed to do because it's exactly what makes you human. It's what keeps you from being, whether you are or not, an arrogant ass. It's what keeps you from being, if you are or not, a narcissist. It's what keeps us human. So anyone see Percy Jackson? Okay, so in Percy Jackson, I forget her name, she says to him, they call it a fatal flaw because it's fatal. We all have a fatal flaw. So your compassion can take you to be a fatal flaw if you're compassionate to an extreme, okay? If you giving time to the wrong people, you take that to an extreme, that could be your fatal flaw. Okay, if you're doing things you shouldn't, is that what it was?
Accepting
Things you shouldn't,
yeah.
that could be your fatal flaw. So we go to extremes with our humanness because we're trying to overcompensate for the fact that we're human. Okay, so every single story. So this is the story of Persephone from Greek mythology. Does anyone remember the story of Persephone from Greek mythology? Okay. Demeter is her mother, and Persephone is the daughter. They are two peas in a pod. They are constantly together, and the mother gives her these narcissus flowers to keep her sort of drugged. What does that represent? We're going to break down the story.
Is that one more time?
The mother keeps her sort of drugged up with these flowers, and they're like two peas in a pod. They're constantly together. What does that part represent?
It's like mind control in a way.
Okay, so go to like something like Shayla, whose mother or father doesn't want to let them go. How many of you guys want to let your kids go? No, you don't.
Yeah, when he's
You don't.
of age.
They can go as long as they're close enough.
Okay, so you don't want to let them go. That's the first step in the story. That is why Disney, that he takes it from every other writer, kills off mom and dad. So Persephone has to get rid of her mother somehow. She has to, because you cannot live your life two peas in a pod with your mother. It is not healthy, because then, like Drew had said, you cannot grow.
There's a show about that.
On
now, too.
Sunday it's starting.
There's a new
TLC
show. These women
Smothered.
bathe together.
Smothered.
The
Yeah,
mother
it's called
daughter?
Smothered.
They bathe
Yeah.
together, like a grown-ass
It's-
woman with another
yeah.
grown-ass woman. They
Okay,
It's
have
called
to
that
bathe
is
Smothered.
sick.
It's
called
on
Smothered.
There's a
TLC
show
on
that's coming out.
on
Where
Sunday.
kids be mothered or
It's
something.
gonna happen,
what's
yes,
And
at
they do
9 o'clock
everything
at night.
together.
Okay,
Not-
watch it.
Yes,
Watch it so
It's
you can
so-
see every single thing that is wrong.
There's a
I was already
part-
traumatized by
Well,
the
it
fact
might
that
turn you on,
No,
Oh,
but
there's nothing to be turned on.
There's-
Absolutely.
you know,
fine.
just saying men with their
Yeah.
two women
There's
fantasies.
Yeah,
a
no,
part-
but they draw bubble baths
No, but
to
there's
sit in the bathtub together.
But that's the
Yeah,
same
you
mom.
just
That's
said
the
shit.
same mom. That's the same mom that tells her daughter's fiance. He proposes to her, and she tells her give it back, and she's like, "What the hell?" Like, and she starts crying. Like, that's the same one. They take baths together. That's the same one
So
that
that
tells her daughter.
relationship
I'm
has
gonna
no
start watching.
boundaries.
Okay, the daughter has issues too.
Yeah.
Yes,
of
they both
course,
have
of
issues.
course.
They both
Okay.
have issues.
Of course. I'm
But
gonna
that
start
is your exact Demeter-Persephone relationship. And you will have clients like that. So for a Demeter-Persephone relationship that has not gotten raped, which is what we're gonna get to in the next part of the story, that client needs to get away from that parent. So we were talking on Tuesday about metaphor, and I had a client like that earlier this week. She was actually calling about her husband, and one of the questions was if the husband should leave the family business. And this was the metaphor that I used. I said, imagine a barber's chair, and he's going to get his shave. What does the barber use for a shave? The razor. And what do they do?
They
Cut it off.
They start shaving.
They're taking it off.
Yes, and what's there?
The throat.
What
Your
artery?
Vena cava.
No.
Carotid.
Your carotid and your jugular, right?
Yeah.
You're saying,
Jugular.
don't they kill you?
Yeah.
Oh, one's an artery and the jugular's a vein.
Okay, but they can kill you.
Yeah.
Yeah, well,
If
the
they-
vein can be kept off and carotid, yeah.
Okay, so in my analogy, not knowing what he knows, I'm like, oh, the mother is giving a close shave to the kid, which is her husband, and is killing him in the jugular. So I gave her can you see the barber chair? Can you see the mother shaving the son and killing him? So this was the metaphor.
No.
Can't see it? You don't have a visual?
I can see
You don't want to? Okay, that's your own issue.
Yeah.
Right there, he just gave us an issue of his.
I don't know, I've seen enough murder shows. So I almost like
Turn on me.
Okay, I didn't. I make this
Yeah.
shit up in session and I make up these metaphors and these stories. So you can't see it because you've got a value system there with mom. But every other person could see it. And this woman, this is her mother-in-law that we're talking about. I said, your husband's in the chair and the mother-in-law is giving him a very close shave, so close, Demeter and Persephone, that she slices the jugular. And the woman saw it immediately, and she's like, absolutely. That's the use of metaphor and story in a session. The client sees it. If they don't see it, there's an issue.
So it's kind of like giving them something to relate to, so they
Absolutely, absolutely. That's why I passed around the book, Metaphors in Healing.
So can I know
Because-
the value system then?
Well, wait. So we just
Well,
know
no.
that there's a Demeter and Persephone thing like in this show that you were talking about.
That's exactly what
So she gives her the narcissus flowers. They're prancing around the town and they're in love, mom and daughter. Okay? What must happen in the story? Just go to Disney.
Someone has to
Something
die.
has to die.
Someone has to die, someone has to leave, someone has to get called to war, someone has to get raped, someone has to something. In this particular story, it's just a story, Persephone gets raped. Pluto, Hades, god of the underworld, rips open the earth and steals Persephone from her mother. This must happen. Every single one of you somehow has been raped. It could have been by your own, and this is a metaphor, although unfortunately for some of you, it has been real. Okay, so rape, some sort of abandonment, your parent died, your parent got married to a new man or woman, and you were on the second, back burner. You had a brother and he dethroned you. Something happened that raped you from that close proximity from the parent. For some people, and in my model, it's just birth. But for some people, it's just the act of being born. Because what happens when you're born? You're born fucked up. You're born into a body. So in my model, it's really at the moment of conception, but through birth. The mere fact of being conceived or birthed, you're already participating in this rape. Every single one of you must have something that rips you from the perfection of your parents. That is what you're listening to from your client. What was the thing that got them out of that safety, that got them out of that protection? Was it a criticism? Were they called incompetent? Were they called lazy? Look at your paper of your humanness, and that is one of the things, one, that in your family there is a value system about, and you are judging yourself for being human. That is what's called the rape of Persephone. So she was raped, she gets to the underworld, and what fruit does Hades give her? You guys should know
We got
this.
the apple.
Not the apple, it looks like an apple.
It's a like a.
Starts with a P, a pomegranate. Okay. So pomegranate, symbolically, if you ever have a client that dreams with pomegranates or loves pomegranates a lot,
They're great.
my daughter,
They're awesome.
there is a symbolism there with sexuality. There is a symbolism there with rape. There is a symbolism there with the story. Okay? The pomegranate represents the vagina.
I just thought it was a really good fruit.
Okay. And people that are very attracted to the pomegranate are actually, they must have, and I know just by looking at you, that you have some Scorpio in the chart.
I just
They
read my
have-
chart, yes. There's
Okay.
Scorpio, and there's a lot of Capricorn.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's interesting because sexually those are two opposing signs. So there's got to be an issue there sexually, where you've got the cold Capricorn that doesn't need sex, so to speak,
Can I smack it real quick?
and then you've got the
Can
Scorpio
you tell
side.
her what you found out this
But
week?
the symbolism of the fruit, like everything else, going back to your salad, I'll say that in a second for those of you who weren't here, represents something. And those things can provoke a hypothesis for you to ask a question to your client. So she gets to the underworld and Hades gives her a pomegranate. And she eats 6 seeds. What's the symbolism of having 6 seeds? Is that there is a saying in the underworld, mind you, this is just a story, that if you eat something in the underworld, okay, that you become Hades' wife, and that you are a guest of the underworld willingly. Every single one of you, by virtue of choosing, and this is a belief that you have to buy into, I can't force you to, by choosing to come to this earth as a human being, chose to be imperfect, chose your parents' imperfections, chose all your shit, chose your bad bucket, chose your problems, chose your traumas.
You chose the forbidden apple.
You chose it, yes, absolutely. So if you choose all of your shit, are you a victim?
No.
No. Now, that does not mean that you don't allow clients to sometimes be in victim mode because you're validating or if they're going through something. But we want to eventually pull clients out of victim mode, and understanding or explaining a story like this can give them a metaphor and say, oh, it plants a seed. Okay? So we're not victims. So, she's down there, quote unquote, willingly, even though he raped her, and she eats 6 pomegranate seeds. And the importance of the 6 is that half the year, there's 12 months, half the year she spends it in the underworld, and half the year she spends up with her mom. So I fast forwarded a second, but so her mother is going crazy looking for her. Goes to Zeus and says, Zeus, help me find my daughter. So Zeus sends Mercury down to the underworld. Mercury's like, can we make a deal here? Demeter needs her daughter back. You cannot live in the underworld forever. How many of you are going through a rough time? Something is going on in your life that's tough. You will get out of it. By virtue of just the story, you must. How many of you see the sunrise every day? How many of you see the sunset every day? That means you must have a sunrise in your life the upswings, and you must have a sunset where it's dark. This wonderful woman here, who is my work mother and cheers me up, especially when I first got here that I was in shambles, put this poster, a quote, on my desk from Charlie Chaplin that said, "Nothing in this world is, in this wicked world is permanent, not even our troubles." And this is exactly this story. Nothing that you're going through is permanent. There will be a sunrise, and if you're in a great life, as I was, believe me, that will end too.
There's always a.
So, one way or the other, you're going to experience the underworld, and you're going to experience the happy-go-lucky time with Demeter. Okay? That's the symbolism of the 6 and 6 of the pomegranate seeds. So Mercury goes down, makes a deal with Hades, and says, "Hades, give Persephone back half the year." And Pluto, Hades, says, "Okay, her mother can have her during spring and summer, and I'll take her during fall and winter."
So it's like a custody thing.
It's like a custody thing. Ironically, I happen to have Pluto in my motherhood house, and that's exactly what happened with me, with my custody battle. So, astrology, we talk about in here. What does it mean when spring and summer, why spring, summer, is she with mom, and why winter, fall, is she with husband?
Isn't it because spring and summer is like the brightest?
Yes, they're bright, the birds are chirping, there's reproduction, there's a lot of
The flowers are
flowers.
blooming so she can.
Drug her.
Yeah.
Okay, so analogy, metaphor. My daughter loves this one. What follows, what season follows every winter?
Fall. Oh.
Winter,
Fall.
spring,
I'm
summer,
singing it.
fall. What comes after winter? Spring. It must. So your client, if they are going through a fall or a winter, they must have a spring that follows. And you can give them that analogy. My daughter says she remembers that from very little. She goes, "Mom, you used to always tell me after every winter is followed by a spring." Symbolically, winter is cold, nothing births, the trees are barren, you're cold. I used this metaphor for a client the other day. It was her and her ex-boyfriend. And I said, imagine a snowman in between the two of you. What do you picture?
Two people standing with the sun.
Okay, but metaphor, give me more.
It's like a blockage.
Okay, there's a block, but why did I use a snowman?
Because it's cold.
Because it's
Because it's
It's
ice,
frozen,
it's
it's-
frozen,
It's just stiff.
it's stiff, there's no warmth. What are they wearing?
cold
Nothing.
clothes.
Nothing?
Jackets.
No, they're wearing scarves.
They're wearing jackets.
They're wearing a scarf, they're wearing jackets, what else?
Oh, it's not with snowman. I've never seen
No,
snowman.
no, the
No,
people.
the
Oh,
people
okay.
wear hats.
They're wearing hats, you see them bundled. Do you want to be bundled and with 20 layers next to your lover?
No.
No, you want to be naked and warm. So when I give her the metaphor of between the two of you is this snowman, she can imagine, and she lives in New York, so she can imagine the winter, that there's distance between the two of them, that they're cold, that something is blocking them. And that was the analogy that I used. And then as we progressed through the session, then I talked about the melting snowman and things like that. That is why I want to really emphasize the use of metaphor and story in a session, because you immediately conjure up an image. It's an archetype. That's all it is. It's just an archetype. And the person has a picture. And we are visual. And so the moment that I can imagine that, I've already planted the seed. So this girl understands that currently, right now, her and her ex are at odds. She understands it, she sees it, she's like, there's layers between us, there's this snowman between us, it's cold, it's frozen. Right now, they are not communicating. Okay? That's why we use metaphor and story. So, going back to the rape. He makes the deal, and he says, okay, Persephone, you can go back to your mom for 6 months, and then you come here 6 months. First of all, it indicates the ebb and flow of our life, that we're going to go to the underworld and have difficult times, and we're going to be back on earth in the sunshine part of our life. It's a 50-50. So if right now you're down, you're going to be up. And if you're up, you're going to be down. The other day you used the metaphor of the ocean.
Of the turtles.
No, you used the ocean or the beach. A way that you can explain this to a client is the waves. What happens to the waves or the tides?
They don't stay, they come.
Exactly. So you can say something like that. Right now you happen to be on high tide, but there's going to be low tide. And you can give an example. Last night I was at the sailing thing, and they were giving this example of this place in Nova Scotia, how you could be eating at the restaurant and there is no tide. And like 20, 30 minutes into your dinner, it is so high, it's like 40 feet. So imagine if you're stuck out there and you don't know the tide and you're stuck out there with a boat. You can use that metaphor for a client. What's happened is, that happened to me. High tide came and I wasn't prepared. I didn't know it was coming. So I got stuck out in there, and now I'm waiting for the low tide to come. You see how you can imagine that versus someone that's prepared for a high tide is going to get out quicker.
Yeah.
So when my kids leaving, I knew that they were going to be leaving. I was prepared for that. I wasn't prepared for my husband leaving. So you could use an analogy or a metaphor like that, and the client now has an image of what it is that's happening to them. And anytime you use anything in nature, it's very valid in a session because people understand for some reason nature is being universal. And so most clients feel alienated and isolated from what's happening to them. They think they're the only ones in the world. Even divorce, it is so common. When you're going through a divorce, you think you're the only one going through the divorce. This never happened to anybody else. The way it happened or your situation, you just feel alienated.
Like a why me situation.
Absolutely. And why me is necessary. It's part of the grief cycle. It's the bargaining stage. There's a pertinence for the why me stage, but it can only last, like anything else, just a stage for a certain amount of time. So now Persephone is allowed to go home to her mother. Why? And many of you haven't done, just from what I've experienced, and this is not a criticism, it's more of an age thing probably, and not everybody, even when they're older, get to this point. But most people haven't done enough processing of their traumas to forgive the parents, let's say, for their fuck up. So this is an ongoing struggle. But why does Persephone go home? Why does she go back to her mother?
She's going to process what's happened.
Okay, we tend to process when we're in the dark. We tend to process when we're in the underworld. When we're lonely, when we're depressed, when we're lonely, when we're depressed, when we're sort of alone in our hermit stage, that's when we tend to process in the darkest times in our life. The happy times in our life, we tend to not really do that much inner work. That's why most clients will call you when their chips are down. What was it that you said?
She had a break.
Okay, she had a break from her mom, but what did that break do for her?
I process more just thinking about the stress over it.
Okay, and as a result, she became what?
Independent.
She grew.
She grew. She became an adult. The break is the teenager. The break is when you rebel against the parents. This is at any age. This is symbolic. Okay, I'm not rebelling against my actual parents right now. I just happen to be in a teenager state trying to become an adult. When we go to the underworld, we start taking responsibility for our actions. We start analyzing what role we've had in the things that's happened to us. We seek therapy, so we grow. So we come home, but we come home different. We come home more mature. We come home with an understanding that's different. So now